Thank you for coming my presentation. My name is Hidemoto Yamauchi. I came to US around 30 years ago, 1994, just about the Japanese PC is almost end of it, end of life. So, and then I'm working for the some company called the Texas Instruments, and then I moved to US as an expat. And I almost left all of my PCs in Japan, and it's scrapped, unfortunately. But I know I lived in the breeze and lived in that 8-bit, from the single board computer to all the way up to the 32-bit computer era in Japan. So I can just tell my brief history or recollection of the 8-bit PC, 8-bit computers to all the way to the 16-bit computers. And then here you go. Come on, you can do it. So my Japanese character is like this. So come on. So this is overview, just introduction, myself, and then the beginning of the 8-bit computers, or in Japanese computer history, and then 8-bit, first 8-bit computers, and then second generation of 8-bit computers, and then 60-bit to the transition to 16 bits, and then 16-bit evolutions, and then transition to the global standard, which is almost the end of the, kill the Japanese PC altogether. And then competing against the global companies such as their compact gateways. And then lastly, I want to just tell the current state of the PC manufacturers in Japan. So I only have 1 hour. So well, so 1 hour is not really good enough to cover every PCs produced in Japan. So I'm not going to cover anything that outside, designed outside of Japan. So such as the, Apple, Atari, PET, Commodore, those things. I'm not going to talk about it, except one notable exception, which is very important in the history of Japanese PCs. And then also that I'm not going to talk about any gaming consoles. So basically, I'm not going to talk about any of the Nintendo systems, And then also, I'm not going to talk about the business-oriented PCs. Japan has their own business-oriented PCs, but if I start covering those things, probably that it's going to take a few hours to go over it. So that, and also, I'm not going to cover the revisions of the PCs. Like PC 98 series, PC 9800 has many different versions, but it's has a 20 years history. So it's almost impossible to cover every bits and pieces of PC 9800. So I'm going to just cover point to point. So what makes the Japanese PC so unique? This is my opinion. So led by the Japanese PCs are led by the big Japanese electronic companies like NEC, Hitachi, Fujitsu and Toshiba, unlike a US market. US market is almost started from their garage. Like Atari, Apple, those companies are started from small and then getting bigger. And then the reason behind it, basically that those Japanese electronic companies were second sourcing their microprocessors. Like NEC, second sourcing the 8080 processors, and then also Z80 processors. And the Hitachi and the Fujitsu also second sourcing the 6800 CPUs. So they are basically trying to find the use case of those things. And then also that make a Japanese PC unique because of the Japanese language. So I brought some Japanese magazines here. So if you have time at the end, you can freely take a look at it. But if you look at it, we have almost daily, we have 4,000 characters in daily use. And then in some cases, we need to use the 10,000 characters or more in some cases, like dictionaries or historical document or government official document or lawyers, as usual. So if you think about it, if you have a 4,000 characters with 16 by 16 pixels, how much memory it requires? It's basically 128 kbyte. It's way more than 64 kbyte used by the 8-bit. So that is a kind of, and then basically that requires the hardware assistance, additional hardware to render those Japanese characters on the screen. So those are always additional hardware in addition to the regular US, computers. As I said, that the history of Japanese computer started with a single board computer, like a US, in a Kim 1, or those things are started. So in Japan, it's the same way. The 4 large electronic companies, NEC, Hitachi, Fujitsu, and Toshiba, they started producing the single board computers because they are second sourcing all the microprocessors from Intel or Motorola. Initially, computers, the PC, the electrical company, they are not targeting the, they are not targeting the hobbyist or any home use. So this is called TK80. TK stands for the training kit. So basically, these are the training kit for the their customer, industrial customers. So basically, those single board computers are supposed to be used for their training, and then their initial introduction to the microprocessor, second sourced by those companies. So the TK80 was introduced in August 1976. Obviously, this is using the second sourced, NEC second sourced 8080 processor called the MUPD88A, which has a slight variation from the original 8080, but it's basically the same CPUs. As you can see, this, the board, it's just a single board with a bunch of, components. And then this was not sold as a complete kit. It's basically sold as the, some assembly required. Basically, it's sold as a PCBs and the components, chips, and those things. The user needs to assemble it, the user needs to build it by themselves. That's the reason the whole point of the training kit. You can just, the customer can just need to do this, assembly. And then also that when they start doing their TK80, they also started open that their, so-called the training center or support center in the heart of Tokyo called Akihabara. So they have the free support center and then free experience, they have a fully assembled TK80 in that location. And then the user can experience the TK80 at that location. So this thing was the plate at the in that building. I was also when I was in middle school, I visited this, the service center many times because I don't have money to buy the TK80. It's 88,000 yen means that probably it's 800 bucks or more. Yeah. So then the NEC originally didn't think about this as this is used for the application. So they just, but hobbyists start notice it. Okay, this can be used for the many different purposes. One case is I have seen that amateur radio operator, they start using this as some controller. So then, and also people start running the basic on this TK80 by themselves. So NEC noticed it, and then NEC saw that the business opportunity for it. So they started selling the so-called TK80 BS, not the BS in the bad means. So this is a TK80 BS. So it's a basic extension. I don't know why they named that way. And then also that they created the Compo BS called this, the box right there. is a initial personal computer in Japan. Of course, other companies start doing the same thing. So this is the Hitachi H68TR. This is using the Hitachi second source 6800. And then it has the more decent keyboard. You can use the regular binary programming, or you can use assembly programming on the fly. And it has the CRT and then the cassette interface as a default. And then Toshiba also made a single board computer called the EX80, which also has the CRT interface. And they're using their own second source 8080 processor. But they are almost about the same price range. It's about 80,000 yen. It's about $800 or to $1,000 at that time. And then this is the Fujitsu's. Interesting enough that the Fujitsu started selling their 16-bit computer ahead of the 8-bit. So LKit 16 on the bottom is using their own microprocessor called the MN1610, which is a 16-bit processor. And then a year after, sometime later, Fujitsu started selling the LKit 8, which is basically the 68,000 base, or 6800 base. So now, the people start notice that 8-bit computers can be useful, and then all the manufacturers start seeing that some sort of the use case for it, and then they realize that okay, we can make some personal computer from it based on that. So they are start making the personal computer. Everybody kind of thought that the personal computer has started. In Japanese computer has started with PC 8001 because it's very famous in Japan. But actually, the MZ80, the Sharp MZ80 was the first computer introduced in Japan. So this was introduced in 1978. And then if you look at this, it seems to be familiar style, like a PET, Commodore PET. Actually, the designer of the MZ80 inspired by the PET, so they want to use the all-in-one enclosure, and then it's like initial PET, the secret type keyboard, and then they also included the cassette tape interface, and then this is using a Z80s as a CPU. And the interesting piece of this thing is they are not. The basic is not on the ROM. The basic, because they don't have they don't want to reproduce the ROM, reprogram the ROM if anything happens. So basically, they have the cassette tape, the basic cassette tape. It was read by the small monitor program. So every time when this machine starts, you need to load the basic or some Pascal or something. And then also the MZ80 was not MZ80 was sold as the semi-complete kit, so still needs to be assembled. Some assembly required. I think that at that time, I think it was a couple of the soldering plus a couple of connectors needs to be attached to it. And then Hitachi at the same time also introduced a machine called the Basic Master. It's a 6800 base machine. And then that was the top two 6800 base. And then bottom one is called the Basic Master Level 3, which was using, the first computer which is using 6809 processors. And then I think this one also can run the OS 9 Level 1 at that time. So now, this is the PC 8001, which is probably most popular initial PC in the NEC history. My friend has one. I couldn't buy one. And this was is using Z80 processor. And also, this is the first Japanese computer which is using the Microsoft Basic. So the Microsoft Basic is on 24K ROM, and then it supports the 160 by 100 pixel graphics. It's minuscule from the current standard, but at that time, this graphics is superior. And the 80 by 25 display is also superior at that, compared to other computers at that time. And also it has the CRT interface, and so basically you can just connect the display and the cassette to start the programming. And then it end up with the 250,000 units was sold. And then this is slightly later, but the Fujitsu is also introduced the same time, introduced the so-called FM8, which is using 6809 processor, two of them, actually. They have one processor for the main processing, and the second processor for the graphics, so that the main processor doesn't need to deal with the graphics rendering, because in Japan, Japanese character need to be rendered in certain way, and then if the main CPU is doing it, it's basically stressing the CPU. So they split the into the two CPUs. But it caused some issue with the gaming, but that's a whole other conversation. So basically, the main CPU can't access any of the graphics without going through the second CPU, so that graphics is good, but when it needs to deal with the some screen thing, it cannot access any information at the second CPU in the second CPU. And also that this is the Fujitsu is also a Japanese mainframe company, so it has option to connect the Japanese mainframe computer. So basically, the Fujitsu wants to have the both purpose. One is hobbyist, and the one is for the business purpose, as used as a terminal for the mainframe. And also that if you notice this, in here there is some small cover. Inside of it, it has the so-called bubble memory. It's a kind of special kind of memory chip. Nobody is using it, but for some reason they supported it. And then most of the people didn't install that option. So basically that area is just some small things to be put in. And then this is the last one. The Toshiba produced a Pasopier, so-called 8-bit computer, but it's just a sort of failure because it's not really get popularity at all. Most of the people doesn't know what this is.
So more as an MSX label.
Yes, MSX is coming later, actually. So then, this is the first generation, and then second generation of 8 bits. Obviously, the second generation with the 8-bit also starts from the NEC, Nippon Electronics, which is they produced the PC8801 as a successor of the PC 8001, which has a much more higher resolution graphics, 640 by 200, and it has support 8 colors. And then also 640 by 400 for the monochrome. And then this mode, this machine can actually display the Japanese character as optional with options, option font. And then it's still expensive side, but and also it has a bunch of there are other interfaces to be connected to the printer, and then floppy disk drive also, as you can see the floppy disk drive in the screen. So this time NEC split their PC business into the basically three pieces, or actually two pieces. One is for the commercial or business purpose computer. That's the PC 8001 and PC 8801 line, which is mostly business oriented or hobby hobbyist oriented. And then also they produce the less expensive PC called the PC 6001. As you can see, the introductory price is 89,000 yen, which is about $800. It's still expensive, but if you compare to the PC 8801, it's a 228,000 yen, means that it's more than $2,000. So this is more or less like a hobby computer, and it has a game cartridge. So you can just stick the cartridge, and then you can start the game right from the cartridge. And then the screen resolution is also decent, but it's not great. But it has a sound chip. Since this machine, NEC start including the sound chip, PSG sound chip. So it has the decent 3 voice, 1 noise type sound. And then it can, it has the joystick port, so that this is more or less like aiming to the home computer, home game computer, like Atari compatible. And then NEC also that splits their line into the home user and then business user. So this is the FM7, which is less expensive version of FM8, removing some of the user interface. But it still keeps the same architecture, 2 CPUs, one for the main CPU, one for the graphics. And then also that it has the PSG, including 8-octave 3-voice sound. So this is more getting popularity in Japan. And also that from this machine, and also that this is the FM11, so-called. This is the one that Fujitsu is targeting the more business-oriented or enthusiastic user, which has a much bigger enclosure, and it has a 2 floppy disk drive as the default. And this one has the interesting pieces. The CPU is in the extension slot, so you can add another CPU to it. So initially, it has the 6809 as a main CPU, and then 6809 as a graphics display or I/O processor. But the main processor can be switched to the 8088, so that I could use the MS-DOS or CPM86 when I flip the switch. And then it has the 6809 has the memory management, so it can address the more than 1 megabyte of memory. So it's getting popularity of the OS 9 level 2 users. And actually, I owned this FM11 when I was in Japan. And then the third-party manufacturer created the additional CPU board, like a Z80 board, and then also there is a 68000 board, so that it has a much more expansion capabilities. And actually, I owned the interesting Z80 CPU card for this one. It's a Z80 CPU card with the 64K memory on it. So I can run the CPM inside of the OS 2. Inside of OS 9. So basically, if I put that card, the CPM is running inside of the one terminal of the OS 9 simultaneously. So that was interesting. I was playing with the OS 9 and the CPM at that time same. And then this is the MZ series, successor of the MZ80. It has also Z80 CPUs, but much sophisticated, keyboard and the enclosures. It's basically the same functionalities, but higher resolution graphics is supported, and also the sound is supported. And interestingly enough, Sharp also started introducing the X1 series from this point. So the reason Sharp has the 2 lines of the PC is based on their divisions again. So MZ series is based on the semiconductor business, and also the, some the much more business unit towards the much more business users, I should say. But X1 series is introduced by the consumer TV division. So this X1 has a much more audio-visual capability, so-called, at that point. The X1...
It looks like stereo equipment.
Yes, exactly the point. So X1 has the its own specialized TV, and if you use the optional TV, without turning on the PC, you can control the TV channels or volume and those things from the keyboard. And then also that, as you can see, this is a more like a silver box, but they have a color variation at that time: red, black, and silver. So it's more like considering that they are targeting the home user as a if you are old enough, you remember the so-called stereo components. You have a bunch, rack and then stick the components in it. They are basically targeting that area. And then also they have the capability of overlaying the TV screen on top of the PC screen on top of a TV. So basically you can do the superimposing. So basically, if you're watching a TV, you can put the computer's character on top of it. And then the other thing is the size of this box is exactly the same size as the all other stereo components, so that it's really you can put this computer into the stereo rack. So this is the Hitachi's second generation. The Basic Master S1. It's a less expensive version, and then it's still using 6809. And it has the memory management unit in it. So it can address the 1 megabyte of memory, even though it's a 8-bit CPU. So this is also the popular computer, Japanese computer in the OS 9 communities. But this computer was introduced way too late, because the people are starting looking at the 16-bit transition. So the functionality-wise and the capability-wise, this is a really superb computer, and I wanted it, but it's not getting popularity at all. And then also other companies produce the computers at this age. The Sony, as you may know, that Sony is a kind of TV manufacturer, stereo component manufacturer. They're also a big audio-visual company. So they introduced a so-called SMC series before the MSX. So upper left corner, that is a so-called SMC 70. It's using a Z80 processor, and then it has an interesting case. So it has a power unit and its keyboard, and they have an extension slot in between. So it's kind of goes into the extended to the back or extended to the front if you add the some expansion kit. And then interesting piece is this SMC 70 is used by the broadcasting station, or they are aiming to the more like a production station. So they have the it has a capability so-called a gen lock. So it's basically synchronized with the TV signal, and then it can superimpose the things over top of the TV. Unfortunately, SMC 70 was also SMC 70 supports the 16 colors, 320 by 200 pixel, 16 colors, and then it supports the much better graphics than other computers at the time, but it's expensive. So Sony introduced a so-called SMC 37 on the bottom. Those are less expensive version. It's about, I think, that 128,000 yen or something. It's about one grand. And it's basically the same capability, but less, less expensive. And then interesting, as you can see that, the Sony, it has the excellent design of the, enclosure. And then Casio. So So if you hear the Casio, most of you guys think that they are the calculator company or watch, but they produced the 8-bit computer at that time. So this is an interesting attempt by Casio. This computer is using the two Z80s basically instead of 6809 as a Fujitsu computer. So they have a main Z80 CPU doing its own thing, and then sub-processor it has the another Z80 like processor, which is basically doing the graphics and I/O stuff. And then this one is not using the Microsoft Basic. They produced their own Basic, but since Casio is a calculator company, they use the internally they use the number format called the binary coded decimal. So if it's BC, so basically that they are using the much higher precision calculation than other companies. So they are more target toward to the business oriented, but actually the price point, they are basically targeting the hobbyist user. Now it comes to the MSX. Yeah. So as you can see that the Japanese PC market, 8-bit market is dominated by basically the NEC, Fujitsu, and Hitachi. Everybody else doesn't have an opportunity to get into the market. So I brought some magazine here. Japanese magazine publisher called ASCII. And then their CEO, Kazuhiko Nishi, and the Microsoft Corporation joint designed the MSX as a standard, so that every other company can get into the PC market. So at that time, even though every company is in some sort of the variation of the Basic, Microsoft Basic, they have a slight difference between them, so that software company can't produce the one software for everybody. So everyone needs to change their code a little bit, and also that 6800 series and the Z80 are totally different CPUs, so that the software manufacturer needs to produce different software for those computers. So MSX tried to resolve that. So MSX defines the basic and then CPUs and all the hardwares, so that every other manufacturers can jump into the market. So in a sense, it's good, but most of the time it was called the losers alliance. So, but it's also produced interesting machines. So the upper left corner, that is from the Yamaha. Yeah, if you know the Yamaha, it's basically the music instruments company, but also they are big semiconductor and electronic business company. So they produce the MSX to connect to the keyboard and all other MIDI instruments. Yeah, and then.
Is there anything Yamaha doesn't make? Is there anything they don't make?
And then Hitachi is also making the and then yeah, and then lower left corner, that is a Casio, which is basically that price breaking machine. They sold their MSX around 29,000 yen, about less than $300. Of course, the compromise is that look at the keyboard. Everybody likes the chocolate keyboard, right?
Yeah, it's like the Atari 400.
Yeah.
No, it's worse. It's like the Mattel Aquarius.
Darn.
And then the Sony is also producing the SMC series was not selling well at all. So the Sony also jumped into MSX bandwagon and producing the so-called hit-bit MSX. And then the bottom one, this is from the Pioneer.
Pioneer.
Pioneer, I need to explain. The Pioneer is a Japanese audiovisual company. They also jumped onto the MSX bandwagon. And then what they did was they created a MSX that controls the laser disc.
That's the bubble product for you.
Or more that they owned all the Laserdisc stuff after buying it from Magnavox, was it?
Yeah, and then when I was of course it's a side story. When I went to some Japanese electric store and then pressed there are a bunch of laser discs, and then I pressed the eject button. All the laser disc ejected.
I mean, that's an ideal setup for like kiosks and stuff that will have stuff running on the loop.
Yeah, but anyhow, so MSX, their objective was good. Objective was good, but it's almost too late. Because people at that time, 1983 and after, people are looking at the 16-bit computers like a PC 98,000 series, 9800 series. Let me take a look at my notes. Oh, by the way, if you noticed it, in Japanese PC market, nobody is using 6502 because every company is a second sourcing either Motorola or Intel or Zyro. So they want to use their second sourced PCs, second sourced microprocessors. So 6502 was mainly used by the I think at that time the Nintendo so-called NES. I'm saying the Famicom. Yeah, but not the mainstream PCs. That's kind of bizarre distinction from the US market, because the US market, everybody was using a 6502 as the 8-bit CPUs, almost.
Europe was similar. The Z80 more or less ruled.
Yeah.
Or 6502 or 6809 machines.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Vietnam was using electronicas from the Russians.
By the way, the MSX is also sold in the other countries. Like I think that it was sold in Russia and also sold in Middle East somewhere.
I've seen an exhibit of Saudi Arabian.
Yeah, Saudi Arabian. Yeah, and then when you look at the eBay, yeah. So now we are going to move to the transition to the 16 bits. So NEC introduced the PC 9801 in 1982, year after the release of 8801. They primarily targeting the PC 9801 for the business users because it's much expensive. And then basically they start splitting the business into 9801 for the business, 8801 for the enthusiastic or high-end users, and then 6001 for the home users. So they are basically distinctive, three. NEC tried to create a three distinctive market, and they actually has their three different divisions to support each line of the PCs. And of course, that after initial release of 9801, oh gosh, 9801, Hitachi and Fujitsu followed it. Fujitsu introduced the so PC 9801. So it was introduced in 1982, and it was using the 8086 processor. Of course, this is a second source, NEC second source processor. And then it has the 640 by 400 pixel 8 colors, and then much more, memories. And then it's supporting the NBasic, so-called the Microsoft Basic. And then this is the Fujitsu FM 16 beta. I just want to put this in here because this is more or less like a business-oriented machine, but this was kind of bridge into the FM towns, which I'm going to introduce later. And then this is a famous C# X68000. So this is also that very interesting machine that has a capability of the sound and graphics capabilities. And then as you can see that this is X68000 starting with X. This is basically handled by their TV consumer TV division instead of the business division. So that reason it has the much more consumer-oriented or audio-oriented capabilities. And then, so this is IBM JX. Probably many of you know so-called IBM PC Junior. So NEC, no, IBM, okay, so I tried not to cover the, anything designed outside of the US. This is the exception. So IBM didn't introduce the IBM PC in Japanese market because it doesn't support the Japanese at all. So IBM Japan wants to introduce IBM JX as the, Japanese, for the Japanese, Asia Pacific Japanese market. This is based on IBM PC Junior. Yeah. So it has a decent price, and then it has a CPU and decent graphics. But the NEC 9801 is already introduced with a real 16-bit CPU 8086. So when the Japanese customer looking at the 8088, oh gosh, this is a less capable machine, and then that shields the fate of this machine. But it has a, and then fate of this machine is very sad. Yeah, okay, so first year it's only manufactured at 2,000 units, and then only 40,000 units was produced in its 3 years, during 3 years. So it's kind of rare machine in a sense. And then 15,000 of those are given to the IBM Japan employees as a 50th their 50th anniversary gift.
Here, take all the stuff we can't sell.
And then give it to the employees. I mean, IBM Japan spent so much money to advertise this thing, but it's miserably failed.
Yeah, that's actually,
But I pick up this machine because this machine is a kind of step towards to the so-called DOS-V. So Japanese, Japanese, MS-DOS is based on this machine, actually. So NEC start using now they switch to their own CPUs. So now they're using a so-called V series CPU, B30, because they have the license agreement with the Intel, and then they can create the first version of 8086, and it's totally pin compatible. So you can just swap the CPU. But of course, Intel doesn't like it. So Intel sued the NEC, and then they settled outside of the code. And then from this machine, after this machine, they cannot use any of the second source agreement to produce a CPU. So the NEC needs to use a genuine genuine 286 or 386 CPUs from that on. And then I put this picture. This is almost towards to the end. And then the bottom one and the left one is so-called PC 98NX, which is nothing more than just a IBM clones. So it basically runs the DOS-V as an operating system. But the number of the units sold the NEC 9800 series is about 18 million units. All the NEC 9800 series. So it's kind of amazing that one company and one series is sold 18 million units. But in the same time, so other company also introduced Epson also introduced the PC. Basically, this is the interesting piece. Basically, this is a clone of the NEC 9801. And of course, NEC doesn't like it. NEC sued it, and then basically settled outside the code. And then they changed their way, producing the clones, and then start selling it. And then in general, the Epson this PC is cheaper and faster, so that in that sense, they got some market share for it. And then this is FM Towns. So this is one of the interesting PC in Japan. This is the first PC includes the CD-ROM drive. So this is a successor of the FM16 beta. I just show it. So this has the 386 CPU and then also the AV capabilities. So it's more or less like they advertised the multimedia machine, and they also did a big campaign, and then they also used the so-called Japanese baseball stadium to do the big advertising campaign. It's about 100,000 people attended it. And then this is Toshiba. Toshiba defines their laptop market by themselves. In the US, it's a machine called the T3100. This is the Japanese version of the T3100. It contains the Japanese font and then Japanese display capabilities. And then the bottom one is so-called the Dynabook J3100. So it's a very small and then light. So they define the distinctive. They define themselves as like a notebook. Toshiba as a notebook company from this machine. And then comes to the so-called AX. So probably this is an interesting piece of the history that, of course, the Japanese market is dominated by the NEC, Fujitsu, and Hitachi. Sounds familiar? The MSX. So AX is basically a 16-bit version of MSX. So every other company outside of the trinity of the Japanese PC jumped onto this. So this is basically designed by, again, ASCII and Microsoft. So defining the exactly same, the architecture, hardware architecture based on the IBM PC, and then they try to use the so-called JEGA, Japanese display capability based on the EGA. And then bad part is that EGA, so-called JEGA, is a custom hardware, and then it's only produced by ASCII and the chips and technology. So it doesn't help the way that lower the price of the PC. And then it's about the same price as PC9001, and the market share is small. So the third party doesn't produce any software to it. So it's failed miserably. And the interesting piece is basically that the company joined to the so-called AX Alliance is exactly the same companies as MSX. So transition to the global standard architecture. So the Japanese PCs has a limitation, because it requires custom hardware to display the Japanese, and then it cannot follow the global standard. And then basically that it doesn't adapt the latest greatest functionality of the other global standard. Like 3D graphics wasn't is introduced very late. Even the 2D acceleration is very late because it doesn't support the Japanese. It needs to support the Japanese hardware thing. So, and then, of course, it becomes the internet age. People start looking at the lower price PCs all over the world. Why do we need to pay the 9800 series this much of money if I can get the PC clone? And then the guy who created JX, IBM JX, MS-DOS, they looked at the architecture, and they realized, okay, if this machine has a 286 and 2 mega memory, and then VGA, we can display Japanese character without any additional hardware. So they created the so-called DOS-B, which is nothing more than just a regular MS-DOS, and then Japanese font as a file, and then display driver to display the Japanese font into the screen. So no special hardware required. So that guy started his own time to start developing DOS-B, and then IBM Japan pushed the DOS-B into the market. And then Japan, anybody outside of NEC formed the so-called, this is actually the DOS-B 6.3b, so-called the OADG, Japanese Open Architecture development group. So they formed the alliance and then start pushing the DOS-B. And then Microsoft also start producing DOS-B. And then come to the point that competing against the global companies. So now DOS-B can be executed, can be installed on the regular PCs. So people realize, okay, there's a Compaq, there is a Dell, there is a Gateway, or there is an Acer. So those companies start selling the PCs in Japanese market. And then its price point is almost half of 9800 series. So it's called when Compaq introduced their first computer in Japan, they really priced half of 9800. And it was called the Compaq shock. Really.
Sounds like a novel tree.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he documented the whole
So-
history of Taiwan. So,
Yeah. And then finally NEC introduced a PC clone called the 98NX. And then this is just the last piece of the, this is the last company that basically jumped onto the regular PC clones architecture. So, even though the market, PC manufacturer has they have some unique capabilities, but they can't compete the market volume or production volume of the company outside of Japan. So Japanese company, as you know that they have their big Japanese electronic company, they have their other business in their in company, so that PC market, the home PC market is not their primary business at that point. So they start selling their PC business. So NEC transferred its PC business to Lenovo, so-called Lenovo NEC. Hitachi completely exited from the personal computer business. They still have the server business, but they are not producing any personal computer, home use computer. Toshiba transferred the PC business to so-called Dynabook Incorporated. That is a Sharp subsidiary. And then, as you may know, the Sharp is also now owned by the Chinese company. So, Honhai,
Foxconn.
Honhai.
Foxconn.
Yeah, Foxconn, yeah. Yeah. And then Fujitsu is also transferred their business to Lenovo. And only the Panasonic is still making the notebook business. And then Sony also transferred their PC business to so-called Bio Corporation. It's owned by the Japanese electric retailer called Nojima. And then Sharp no longer in the PC business, and even the company itself is not the Japanese company anymore. And then Epson is still producing the build-to-order BTO type computer. And then Casio no longer in the PC business. So it's basically that DOS-B and the Windows sealed the fate of the Japanese computer market. It's good and bad, because I don't see any kind of unique computers in the PC market, but it's kind of trend of the world, world trend, so that it's kind of hard to compete against. So lastly, I just want to acknowledge the Yoshizaki-san. He was the first editor-in-chief of the ASCII magazine. And now he owns the so-called Micon and the Dream Library in Tokyo. As you can see that many of my pictures are coming from his his museum. So he permitted me to photograph his artifact. There are tons of artifacts in there. And then I'm truly grateful for his support for preserving the Japanese PCs in his museum. Some of them are really working condition. So if you have a chance to visit Tokyo, it's a very far part of Tokyo called Ome. But it's worth visiting it. And then he's encouraging me to do making this presentation. And also that I want to recognize my son, Leona. patiently proofreading my bad English. So that's all I have. Is there any question or? Yes.
Japanese computers use ShipJIS. Would that be in the transition between?
Excuse me?
ShipJIS encoding?
Yeah.
Would that be used in between the transition between using global computers?
So we are talking about the Japanese character cannot be mapped into the 8 bits.
That was more just pre-Unicode, wasn't it?
Well, it's a clever way to encode the Japanese character, and it was introduced in MS-DOS.
Okay.
And then actually that is again ASCII. So ASCII is the one company who also designed the MS-DOS, or ShiftJIS actually within Microsoft, and it was used all the way up to Windows 3.1. Well, Windows 98, I think. And then when the Microsoft produced the Windows XP, or Windows NT, I think. Windows NT, they switched to the, supporting the Unicode. Up until that point, all the Japanese characters are using MS, so-called ShiftJIS. That's, supporting the Japanese characters or another, I think presentation topic, I think, if we are interested in how to support the Japanese. Yes.
So I just noticed a lot of times it mentioned the keyboards with the JIS. Is that just the Kana version?
Yes, the JIS keyboard is alphanumeric. Almost alphanumeric is the same layout, but the special characters like a equal sign or dollar sign or asterisk, those are in a different location. And on top they have a Kana character on the keyboard. Yes.
I was thinking there were a number of regional exclusive pre-internet online network services at the time, particularly Silicon or PC Van and CompuServe, which is a derivation of CompuServe.
Yep.
Did you have any experience using those?
Yeah, I have used many of them. I think basically I have a very early number of the ASCII.NET PCs. And then also I have the account for the Nifty Sub, and also I have an account for the Nikkei Mix. So those are mostly so-called BBS, Britain Board System, owned by the some Japanese manufacturer, and mostly the magazine publisher. The ASCII is the one that they have a so-called ASCII.NET, and then another Japanese publisher called the Nikkei has a so-called Nikkei Mix, which is basically that if you are old enough to remember the BICS.
Yes.
So that is basically Japanese version of the, is that the, what's that? McGraw-Hill.
Oh.
McGraw-Hill BICS. Japanese version of the McGraw-Hill BICS. And then also that Fujitsu and its subsidiary owned the Nifty, which is almost the last, BBS. Oh, yeah. Okay, so I brought there some, Japanese magazines. So if we have still 30 minutes to, in this room. So if you're interested in, you can see you can take a look at the, those Japanese magazines. And then thank you for coming. And then thank you for your presence.